To the outside world, Nikki Delventhal is the embodiment of freedom. She's that smiling face in the middle of the desert, laughing with her rescue dog Camper, while filming the kind of breathtaking landscapes most of us only dream about. Her YouTube channel boasts hundreds of thousands of subscribers, and her Instagram feed is a colorful patchwork of road trips, sunsets, campfires, and self-discovery. But what makes Nikki's story more than just another van life fantasy is the pain she hides just beneath the surface. Her journey to peace was not a smooth one. It's filled with silent struggles, personal reinvention, and a powerful decision to walk away from the life she thought she wanted. The smile we see today was hard-earned, forged through heartbreak, sacrifice, and a long, lonely road toward healing. Before she became a digital nomad and content creator, Nikki lived a very different life. Raised in Connecticut, she was known early on for her charm, athleticism, and striking beauty. She was drawn to the world of performance and perfection, driven by an internal need to prove herself. That desire led her to a career in modeling and eventually landed her a spot as an NFL cheerleader. She even appeared on shows like The Bachelor, which promised fame and adventure, but often delivered something far more artificial. From the outside, her life was glamorous. She was the girl others envied, fit, energetic, and seemingly fearless. But inside, Nikki was fighting an invisible war with herself. That life, while shiny on the surface, was beginning to feel suffocating. At the time, she was working in industries that placed enormous value on appearance, discipline, and branding. The pressure to always smile, always perform, always maintain the illusion of happiness began to erode her mental and emotional well-being. She later described those years as ones where she was living for everyone else. There's a distinct sadness in that statement, one that foreshadows the radical transformation she would soon undergo. Nikki had spent years climbing ladders she never really wanted to be on, chasing success that felt increasingly hollow. The deeper she went into that world, the more disconnected she felt from her true self. Eventually, the cost of pretending became too great. Nikki made a decision that shocked many of the people around her. She quit it all: the jobs, the lifestyle, the expectations. She gave it all up in favor of something uncertain, something raw, and something real. She sold most of her belongings and moved into her Prius, setting out on a journey that had no map, no plan, and no guarantee of success. It was a decision that most people would consider desperate, maybe even reckless. But for Nikki, it was the first step toward salvation. What looked like a breakdown was really a breakthrough. In shedding the layers she had built to survive, she finally started to feel alive. This is where Nikki's real story begins. Not in the glittering world of fame and filtered smiles, but in the quiet of a car parked under the stars. The woman we see today, thriving in her own way, carries within her the weight of everything she walked away from. The heartbreak in her story isn't just in what she lost, it's in how long it took to realize that none of it ever really belonged to her. Nikki Delventhal didn't stumble into the spotlight, she ran toward it. Growing up in a supportive but traditional family in Connecticut, she always felt a restless energy within her. She wasn't content with a conventional life path. Her eyes were fixed on something brighter, bigger, louder. From a young age, she dreamed of performing, captivating audiences, and being part of something glamorous. With a magnetic personality, a radiant smile, and natural charisma, Nikki seemed built for the stage. She was smart and driven, but it was her presence that set her apart. She chased her dreams with conviction, and for a time it seemed like she was on the verge of having it all. After high school, Nikki dove into the entertainment world with impressive determination. She became an NFL cheerleader for the New York Jets. A dream job for many, but also one that came with high physical demands, rigorous schedules, and enormous pressure to maintain a flawless image. She was admired for her athleticism and energy, but what fans didn't see was the strict discipline, the constant scrutiny, and the toll it took on her mental health. She supplemented her career with modeling gigs, fitness coaching, and reality TV appearances. On paper, Nikki was living the dream, traveling, performing, being featured in magazines, and building a portfolio that many would envy. But the higher she climbed, the more hollow it began to feel. The entertainment world that once lit her up was now dimming her light. Nikki began to notice that so much of her worth in that space was based on how she looked, not who she was. Every opportunity seemed to come with strings attached. Expectations about her body, her smile, her energy, her brand. Behind the scenes, she wrestled with anxiety, perfectionism, and imposter syndrome. She was constantly trying to be what others wanted her to be, and somewhere along the way, She lost track of who she really was. Even though Nikki was surrounded by people, she felt more alone than ever. Her days were filled with rehearsals, castings, and social media promotions, but her nights were often sleepless and filled with self-doubt. The spotlight that once gave her purpose now felt like a microscope, exposing every flaw, every failure. She began questioning whether she had ever truly wanted this life, or if she had just been chasing what she thought she was supposed to want. The parties, the promotions, the likes and follows, they no longer satisfied her. They only deepened the ache. She started to feel like a passenger in her own life, going through the motions, performing for a world that didn't know her, and slowly, the facade began to crack. Nikki found herself pulled in two directions, one leading deeper into fame and burnout, and the other towards something quieter, more authentic, and terrifyingly uncertain. The choice would come to define her entire life. But before she could make it, she had to face a difficult truth. Sometimes the dream we chase is the very thing keeping us from being free. At the peak of her professional visibility, Nikki Delventhal was also at her emotional breaking point. From the outside, her life still looked enviable. She was posting glamorous photos, landing brand deals, and getting invited to exclusive events. But privately, Nikki was unraveling. Years of chasing perfection had caught up with her. She was emotionally drained, spiritually lost, and silently suffering from anxiety and depression. The constant demands of performance, the shallowness of influencer culture, and the exhausting grind of content creation had become too much. Every day felt like a performance she no longer believed in. The mask was slipping, and underneath was a woman desperate for something real. Nikki began withdrawing from the scene, slowly and quietly. She declined offers she once would have jumped at. She stopped posting regularly. Friends noticed a shift in her energy. She seemed tired, reflective, and distant. But the truth was, she was experiencing a complete identity crisis. Who was she if she wasn't a cheerleader, a model, an influencer? She had built her entire life around these roles, and now they felt like costumes she couldn't wait to take off. The pressure to maintain the illusion of success was crushing. She feared judgment, failure, and the unknown. But she feared continuing to live a lie even more. Eventually, Nikki hit an emotional wall. She describes it as a moment of complete collapse. She sat alone in her apartment one night and realized she didn't recognize herself anymore. Everything she had built, everything she had worked so hard for, no longer brought her joy. It brought only exhaustion. That night, for the first time in years, she allowed herself to truly feel the pain she'd been suppressing. It wasn't glamorous, it was raw and dark, but it was also the beginning of something honest. Rather than continue on the same path, Nikki did something radical. She turned down steady work, ended toxic relationships, and made a promise to herself. She would no longer live for other people's approval. It was a decision that would come with enormous consequences: financial uncertainty, personal sacrifice, and total reinvention. But it was also her first act of freedom. She didn't know what came next, but she knew it had to be different. And so she made the most terrifying choice of all: to start over with nothing but a car, a map, and a longing for something real. The day Nikki Delventhal packed up her Prius and left behind the life she had known was not some magical movie-like moment. It was messy, it was terrifying, and it was full of uncertainty. She wasn't running toward a new dream. She was running from a life that had become unbearable. Her car became her new home, not because she wanted to be trendy, but because she had nowhere else to go. The choice to live out of her vehicle wasn't made for content. It was made for survival. And yet, in that tiny, cramped space, something began to shift. The silence of the road was jarring at first. No more schedules, no more performances. Just endless stretches of highway, wide open skies, and time. So much time to think. At first it felt like freedom, but then the reality set in. Nikki was alone. Truly alone. No backup plan, no audience. Just a woman, a car, and the heavy weight of her past. She cried more in those first few weeks than she had in years. But in between the tears, she started to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: clarity. Nights were cold and uncertain. She parked in forests, deserts, and Walmart lots. She cooked on camp stoves, showered at gyms, and learned how to live with less. But with every passing mile, she felt layers of herself falling away. Layers of expectation, fear, and performance. She began journaling again, filming for herself, not an audience, and finding beauty in the stillness. It was hard, humbling work, and yet it was honest. The Nikki who had once lived for approval was slowly being replaced by a Nikki who craved authenticity. The irony was that in leaving everything behind, she was beginning to find everything that mattered. The road didn't offer answers, but it gave her space. It let her feel, break, grieve, and begin again. She was no longer in survival mode, she was evolving. Living in a car was, for many, a symbol of failure. But for Nikki, it became the birthplace of a new identity. She wasn't broken, she was rebuilding. It's in this chapter of her story where the tragedy deepens. Not because she failed, but because she had to lose so much just to get a glimpse of who she really was. The world she left behind never saw the quiet battles she fought alone in that Prius. The loneliness, the doubt, the questions about whether she'd made a huge mistake. But it's also the chapter where the seeds of her rebirth were planted. She didn't know it yet, but on one of those lonely roads, she was about to meet someone who would change everything. A skinny, stray dog who would become her entire world. It was just another dusty road in New Mexico. Nikki had pulled off the highway to find a place to camp for the night, exhausted from hours of driving, emotionally drained, and wondering once again if she was on the right path. The sun was low in the sky, casting golden light over the desert landscape. As she crept slowly down a dirt path in her Prius, something unusual caught her eye. A dog, thin to the bone, limping along behind her vehicle, chasing it as though it was his last chance at survival. That single moment would change Nikki's life in a way nothing else had. The dog, who would later be named Camper, was emaciated and covered in fleas and ticks. He had no collar, no ID, and no one in sight. Nikki stopped the car, unsure if he was friendly or feral, but as he approached, she saw the desperation and hope in his eyes. He wasn't aggressive, he was begging for help. Nikki opened her car door, and without hesitation, the dog jumped in. It was as if he knew somehow that this woman would save him, and in a way that Nikki couldn't yet understand, he would save her too. In the weeks that followed, Nikki did everything she could to care for Camper. She took him to a vet, fed him back to health, and slowly helped him recover from whatever life had done to him before they met. But something deeper was happening between them. Their bond was instant and fierce, built not just on companionship, but on shared survival. Nikki saw herself in Camper, a soul that had been cast aside, misunderstood, and yet still had hope. Together, they started to form a new kind of family, one that didn't need a house, a job, or a traditional plan. Just trust, loyalty, and love. Camper gave Nikki a purpose that had been missing for years. Where once she traveled aimlessly, she now had a responsibility to care for this dog, to protect him, and to be the human he deserved. He gave her structure, joy, and most importantly, he gave her someone to talk to in the long, lonely stretches of the road. Camper didn't care about Nikki's past, her resume, or her failures. He just loved her, unconditionally. That kind of love after years of performative relationships was revolutionary. As their adventures continued, Nikki began documenting their journey, not for fame, but to share something authentic. Videos of her and Camper exploring national parks, fixing up a van, and surviving off-grid began to connect with audiences around the world. People were drawn not just to the scenery, but to the raw, unscripted love between a woman and her dog. In saving Camper, Nikki had unknowingly created a new path for herself, one rooted in truth, healing, and mutual rescue. But make no mistake, this wasn't a fairy tale. Camper came with challenges, and Nikki's life on the road was still far from easy. There were nights of crying in the dark, breakdowns both mechanical and emotional, and days when she questioned whether this new life could really sustain her. Still, in the soft gaze of a dog who never gave up on her, Nikki began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could stop giving up on herself too. To the millions watching online, Nikki Delventhal's life in a van looked like a dream. Waking up to mountain sunrises, hiking through Red Rock canyons, and cooking wholesome meals next to lakes and waterfalls. Her YouTube channel painted a picture of freedom, simplicity, and peace. But behind the beautiful videos and curated moments was a much harder truth. Van life, for all its aesthetic charm, was often brutally difficult. It wasn't just about unplugging from society, it was about sacrificing comfort, security, and routine. And the emotional cost was something Nikki rarely talked about publicly. Her van, a self-renovated 2006 Toyota Sienna, and later a full camper van, was beautiful in its own way, but it was still a tiny metal box on wheels. There were days when Nikki battled extreme heat, freezing temperatures, and broken down equipment. Sometimes she woke up to the sound of someone knocking on her window, telling her she couldn't park there. Other times, she faced the terror of being alone in unfamiliar places, wondering if she was safe. Simple tasks, showering, getting water, charging her devices, required planning and energy. And then there was the content creation itself, which, although fulfilling, was also a full-time job with invisible pressures. As her YouTube channel gained traction, Nikki felt a renewed sense of purpose, but also a creeping burden. There was a growing expectation to always be inspirational, always be positive, always be on. She became a symbol for freedom and courage, but inside she still wrestled with fear, doubt, and fatigue. The disconnect between her online persona and her private struggles grew wider with each upload. She didn't want to lie to her audience, but she also didn't want to burden them. So she kept smiling, editing, and pushing forward. Loneliness was another shadow that followed her. While Camper provided love and companionship, the lack of human connection wore her down. She missed deep conversations, family dinners, and the feeling of truly being seen. The nomadic lifestyle meant she was always moving, rarely able to build lasting friendships. She began to question, was she free or was she just running? Was this what healing looked like? Or was it another form of escape? At times she considered giving it up, going back to a regular job, getting an apartment, living a normal life again. But every time she entertained those thoughts, she felt the old dread return, that suffocating feeling of being boxed into a life that wasn't hers. Van life, for all its challenges, was still her choice, and that autonomy meant everything. But choice doesn't always equal ease. She started sharing more honest moments with her audience, letting the cracks show, crying on camera, admitting burnout, talking about the emotional toll of being a content creator. And something beautiful happened. People responded with empathy, not judgment. Nikki's vulnerability gave others permission to feel less alone in their own struggles. Her story was no longer just about adventure. It was about resilience, about rebuilding, and about the complicated truth that freedom often comes at a high emotional cost. While Nikki was carving out a new life on the road, far from the familiar routines of her past, her family was watching from a distance, sometimes with admiration, often with worry, and always with the ache that comes from watching someone you love choose a path you don't fully understand. To them, Nikki's decision to live in a car, then a van, and travel across the country might have looked like a breakdown, not a breakthrough. Her parents, like many, grew up believing stability was safety and success meant consistency. So when their daughter traded insecurity for solitude, it caused tension, confusion, and at times, heartbreak. Nikki has occasionally spoken about the strain that her lifestyle has placed on her relationship with her family. Though they love her deeply, there was a disconnect, a sense that they were watching her drift further away, both literally and emotionally. Phone calls were missed, holidays were sometimes spent alone, and though her family supported her from afar, they struggled with the reality that Nikki's healing required distance. She wasn't just physically on the road, she was spiritually somewhere else, needing space from everything that reminded her of who she used to be. The pain of that disconnect ran both ways. Nikki missed her family deeply. She missed the safety of her childhood home, the warm embrace of her mother, the sense of belonging that comes from simply being known. But she also knew that going back to expectations, back to being the version of herself that everyone understood, would mean giving up the self she was finally beginning to discover. It was a heartbreaking trade-off. To find herself, she had to lose something else. There were times when communication broke down completely, times when her family begged her to come home, times when Nikki, frustrated and defensive, pushed them away further. These weren't dramatic fights. They were slow, aching misunderstandings. She wasn't rebelling, she was surviving. But for those watching from the outside, her journey looked like isolation. And for a family that once watched her cheer in stadiums and walk red carpets,